Hello, my dearest friends. Welcome to Bible Stories for Sleep. I'm so glad you are here with us tonight. Before we begin, take a deep breath. You are in a safe place. This is your quiet moment. Let your heart be calm and your mind rest. If you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who may also need peaceful rest tonight. And tell us in the comments where you are listening from. We love to know how far these calming stories travel. Whether you are lying in bed in a quiet village, a busy city, or somewhere in between, you are warmly welcome here. Now, let us begin tonight's peaceful journey together. Close your eyes, relax, and listen gently as we begin the story of Abraham and Sarah. A story of faith, hope, and the quiet trust in promises that unfold slowly, like the stars above a sleeping world. Long ago, in a land of ancient rivers and wide-open skies, there was a city called Ur of the Chaldeans. This city was full of light and life, with markets and music, clay houses and tall towers, and the soft hum of voices rising like smoke into the warm desert air. In that city lived a man named Abram, a thoughtful and kind-hearted man. He lived with his wife, Sarai, whose beauty was matched by her grace and quiet wisdom. They were part of a large family, and they had many belongings, servants, and animals. Their life was peaceful, but in Sarai's heart, there was a longing she could not fill. Sarai and Abram had no children, though they had been married for many years. Still, they treated each other with tenderness and patience. When Sarai sat by the oil lamp in the evening, she would look at Abram and smile gently, and he would take her hand in his, saying nothing but offering all the comfort his presence could give. Abram's father was named Terah, and their family came from the line of Shem, the son of Noah. The stories of old had passed down through generations. Tales of the great flood, of the mighty ark, and of the rainbow that shone in the sky afterward. These stories were not just bedtime tales. They were sacred memories, carefully passed from parent to child like precious heirlooms. Then, one evening, as the stars twinkled above and the gentle breeze rustled through the date palms, Abram heard a voice. It was not loud. It did not shake the ground. It was calm and clear and kind. It was the voice of God. And God said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Abram stood very still. His heart was quiet, and his breath was slow. He did not argue. He did not doubt. He simply listened. And when the voice faded into the soft winds of the night, he turned to Sarai with peace in his eyes. "Sarai," he said softly, "we are being called." Sarai looked at him, and though her heart was full of questions, she saw something gentle in his face. Something true. She nodded. They began to pack. Carefully, slowly, they gathered their belongings. Their tents, their vessels, their animals, and their servants. Lot, Abram's nephew, would come with them. Terah too would begin the journey with them. And so, early one morning, as the sun rose with a golden light over the flat lands of Ur, the family began to walk. They left behind the comforts of their home. They followed no map. They were not chasing gold or conquest. They followed a voice, a promise, a quiet leading. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. They traveled through wide plains and between slow rivers. Sometimes they walked in silence, and sometimes they spoke softly of the stars, of the past, and of what might lie ahead. At last, they came to a place called Haran, where they stayed for a time. It was a place of rest, a place to pause. There, Terah, Abram's father, passed away. It was a quiet passing, and the family mourned gently. Abram honored his father with quiet prayer, standing under the stars that had guided them so far. And when the time came, Abram heard the voice again. The same voice that had spoken in Ur. Calm, steady, peaceful. And so, with the quiet faith of someone who walks not by sight but by trust, Abram and Sarai continued their journey. With their tents rolled up, their camels steady, and their hearts still, they stepped forward into the unknown. The sky above was wide, and the land before them was open. And somewhere in that open land was the promise that would become the beginning of many stories. Not just theirs, but of generations to come. As they walked, Sarai rested her head on Abram's shoulder, and Abram smiled at the horizon, the same way someone smiles at a sunrise. Not with fear, but with quiet hope. The journey had only begun. The morning was quiet. The earth was still. A soft wind whispered through the tall grasses. Abram stood at the edge of his camp, looking out at the open land before him. It stretched far and wide, with rolling hills and dry valleys, scattered trees, and distant mountains. This was the land of Canaan, and it was unlike any place they had known. God had spoken again. Abram had heard the words clearly. Go to the land I will show you. And so, even after the death of his father Terah in Haran, Abram continued on. He was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. Sarai, his wife, was beside him. Lot, his brother's son, was with them. They brought all the possessions they had gathered, and the people they had acquired in Haran. They left with no map and no detailed plan. They followed only the voice that had called them. The journey was long, but peaceful. Days passed slowly. Nights were filled with stars. The sound of camel hooves pressed gently into the earth, and the bells on their necks made soft music as they moved. Children among the servants laughed as they walked, and Sarai sometimes sang old songs from Ur as she rode beside Abram. They traveled south into the heart of Canaan. When they reached the great tree of Moreh, near the place called Shechem, Abram paused. There, in the shade of the tall oak, God appeared to him again. God said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram's heart swelled with quiet wonder. He looked at the land around him. It was dry in places and green in others. It was vast. He looked at Sarai, and then at Lot. They had no children, and yet God had said that his offspring would inherit this land. Abram did not question. He believed. There under the tree of Moreh, Abram built an altar. He gathered stones with his own hands and placed them carefully. He did not build it with noise or haste. He built it with reverence. When it was finished, He knelt beside it and offered quiet worship to the God who had spoken. From there, Abram moved on toward the hills east of Bethel, pitching his tent between Bethel on the west and Ari on the east. There he built another altar. Again, he called on the name of the Lord. The fire crackled gently on the stones as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sarai sat near the entrance of the tent, her eyes soft and thoughtful. Abram stood quietly in prayer, his voice no louder than the wind. Their journey continued slowly through the land. But soon, a change came. The skies grew hotter. The winds turned dry. The grass began to fade. A famine swept across the land of Canaan. There was little food. The animals grew tired. The servants whispered among themselves. Sarai looked to Abram, waiting for his wisdom. Abram knew what to do. They would travel to Egypt, where the great river gave life even in times of drought. Egypt was far, but it was known for its abundance. And so again, Abram led his household with quiet strength. As they approached the border of Egypt, Abram turned to Sarai with a troubled heart. He said to her, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake and my life will be spared because of you." Sarai listened. She said nothing. Her face was calm. She trusted Abram, even when the road grew strange. When they entered Egypt, just as Abram had feared, the people noticed Sarai. Her beauty was seen by the officials of Pharaoh, the ruler of the land. She was taken into Pharaoh's house. Abram was treated well for her sake. He received sheep, cattle, donkeys, servants, and camels. But something was wrong. Though Pharaoh did not know the truth, God did. And soon, the house of Pharaoh was struck by serious diseases. Pharaoh began to understand that something was not right. He called Abram and asked, "What have you done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Abram did not argue. He took Sarai and left. Pharaoh gave orders for his men to see them safely out of Egypt. And so they returned, quietly, with all their possessions. There had been fear, but there had also been protection. Even in this misstep, God had watched over them. They returned to Canaan, back to the place between Bethel and Ari, where Abram had built his altar before. And there, in that familiar place, Abram called on the name of the Lord again. His journey had taken him far already, yet he still had much farther to go. But for now, he was home. Not in a house of bricks, not in a city of noise, but under the open sky, among the hills and altars of his new life. Sarai sat beside him that night, listening to the wind through the tent. Abram looked up at the stars. Thousands of tiny lights stretched across the dark sky. Somewhere in the silence, he felt the presence of God. Not loud, not forceful, just there, always there. And so they slept. Abram and Sarai, surrounded by their servants and flocks, with the soft hum of the earth beneath them and the quiet promise of heaven above. The days in Canaan were long and warm. The grasses swayed gently in the wind. The trees cast soft shadows over the land where Abram and his household had made their home once more. The famine had passed, and the land had begun to heal. The animals grazed peacefully. The servants worked quietly, and the nights were filled with stars that twinkled softly over the hills between Bethel and Ari. Abram's heart was calm. He had returned to the land of promise, and the Lord had protected him even when his fears had led him astray. Sarai was by his side, her presence gentle and strong. The servants respected her, and her eyes carried both wisdom and grace. But the camp was growing crowded. Abram was very wealthy in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Lot, his nephew, also had flocks and herds and tents. Together, they had many animals, many workers, and many mouths to feed. One morning, as the sun rose over the hilltops, a quiet tension began to stir. The herders of Abram's livestock and the herders of Lot's livestock were arguing. Their voices, though not loud, unsettled the calm rhythm of the camp. The land could not support both groups living so close together. There were not enough grassy pastures or gentle springs for all the animals. The flocks wandered too close to one another. The wells became crowded. There were sharp glances and whispered complaints. Abram noticed this change. He did not wait for the conflict to grow. One day, he walked with Lot across a ridge where they could see the wide valleys stretched before them. The wind was soft. The earth below was still. Abram turned to Lot and spoke with quiet kindness. "Let there be no quarrel between you and me," he said, "or between your herders and mine. For we are family. Is not the whole land before you? Let us part company. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Lot looked out over the land. He saw the whole plain of the Jordan, lush and green, watered like a garden. It was rich and fertile, with many cities nearby. It reminded him of the land of Egypt, where they had once taken refuge. Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. He pitched his tents near a city called Sodom. The land was beautiful, but the people there were not kind. They were wicked and did not honor God. Still, Lot settled there, believing he had chosen well. Abram remained in the land of Canaan, where the hills were more rugged and the land less rich. But his heart was still. He had given Lot the first choice and asked for nothing in return. He trusted the promise more than the land. That night, as the camp settled and the fires burned low, God spoke to Abram once more. The voice was gentle and full of peace. "Lift up your eyes," said the Lord, "from where you are. Look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." Abram listened quietly. He looked out across the hills and valleys. His eyes followed the distant trees and the winding streams. And though he had no child, and though Sarai had not yet conceived, he believed. Not with noise or fanfare, but with quiet trust. The next day, Abram moved his tents once more. He traveled to a place near Hebron, to the great trees of Mamre. The trees were old and strong, their roots deep in the earth. There, among the shade and quiet, Abram built another altar to the Lord. Sarai walked beside him through the tall grass, her veil brushing gently against her shoulders. She was quiet, but her eyes held questions. She had followed Abram across many lands. She had trusted him through changes and trials. But the years passed slowly, and still, they had no child. Still, she did not speak her sorrow. Not yet. She watched him gather stones for the altar. She saw the way he lifted his eyes to the heavens when he prayed. And she held her silence like a folded cloth across her heart. Abram, too, waited. He did not know when the promise would come. But each time he built an altar, each time he pitched a tent, each time he listened to the soft voice in the night, he believed. And the stars above continued to shine. Quiet, steady, faithful. Like the God who had called him. Like the journey they still had ahead. The herders no longer quarreled. The camp was peaceful again. And under the shade of the great trees, the quiet life of faith went on. The days passed gently beneath the great trees of Mamre. The winds that moved through the branches carried the songs of birds and the soft rustling of leaves. Abram's camp was peaceful. His herds grazed on the quiet slopes, and his servants moved calmly among the tents. Sarai remained thoughtful, watching the skies each evening as the stars appeared. She did not know how her story would unfold, but she stayed beside Abram with quiet strength. Far to the east, in the lush plains where Lot had chosen to settle, life was less peaceful. The cities of that region were ruled by kings, and these kings had long been forced to serve a powerful alliance from the east. After many years of this service, the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela decided to rebel. The kings of the east responded with force. 4 kings gathered their armies and swept across the land. They conquered everything in their path. They marched through lands and valleys, defeating all who stood before them. They reached the plains where Lot lived, and there they fought against the 5 kings of the region. The battle took place in the valley of Siddim, where tar pits dotted the land. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some of their soldiers fell into the pits. Others ran into the hills. The eastern kings took everything. They seized the wealth of the cities, the food, the livestock, and the people. Among them was Lot, the nephew of Abram. Lot was taken prisoner, along with his household and his belongings. A servant escaped and came running to Abram. He was out of breath and dusty from travel. He fell at Abram's feet and told him what had happened. Abram did not wait. He called together the trained men born in his household, all 318 of them. He armed them and prepared them quietly. He did not cry out. He did not boast. He simply moved with purpose. That night, they set out. They followed the trail of the eastern kings as far as Dan, in the northernmost part of the land. When they reached the edge of the enemy's camp, Abram divided his men and attacked in the darkness. The surprise was complete. The enemy fled in confusion. Abram and his men pursued them all the way to Hobah, north of Damascus. When the fighting was over, Abram gathered the people and the possessions. He found Lot and brought him back. Lot's family, his servants, and all his goods were returned. Abram had not gone for riches or fame. He had gone to save the one he loved. As they returned south, the kings of the region came out to meet Abram. Among them was the king of Salem, a city of peace. His name was Melchizedek, and he was not like the others. He was both a king and a priest. He brought out bread and wine, and he blessed Abram with words that were quiet and full of truth. He said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram bowed his head and gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything he had recovered. It was a gift of gratitude, not out of obligation, but from a heart that remembered the true source of all things. Then the king of Sodom approached Abram. He said, "Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself." But Abram answered with gentleness and certainty. He said, "I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.'" He asked only that his allies receive their share, and nothing more. Abram would not take glory that belonged to God. He would not gain wealth through favors or worldly gifts. His trust remained in the quiet promise he had received beneath the stars. When Abram returned to Mamre, the camp welcomed him in peace. Sarai stood at the entrance to their tent. Her eyes searched his face, and when she saw that he had returned safely, she smiled. They did not speak of the battle that night. They sat beneath the stars, as they had done so many times before. The breeze was soft, and the air smelled of grass and evening firewood. The stars shimmered above like thousands of tiny candles in the sky. Sarai rested her head against Abram's shoulder. He said nothing. There was no need. His heart was steady, not because of victory, but because he had remained faithful, and because even in conflict, he had not strayed from the voice that had called him long ago. The quiet of the night returned to the hills of Hebron, and Abram, the man of peace, the man of faith, laid his head down in rest once more. The air was still that evening. The hills of Hebron glowed softly under the setting sun, and the trees of Mamre stood like silent watchers over the land. Abram sat outside his tent, gazing up at the fading light. The stars had not yet appeared, but he knew they were waiting above, hidden behind the veil of dusk. His heart was full, not with fear, but with quiet wondering. He had seen many things. He had walked many miles. He had watched Lot go his own way, and had risked his life to bring him back. He had met a king who blessed him and offered him peace. And yet, something in his heart remained unanswered. He had followed God's voice. He had believed. But still, he had no child. And with each passing year, the hope of a child felt farther away. Then the quiet was broken, not by noise, but by presence. The voice of God came to Abram in a vision, gentle as wind and firm as stone. "Do not be afraid, Abram," said the Lord. "I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram listened. His heart was open. He had no fear of armies. He had no need for gold. But he spoke softly in reply. "Sovereign Lord," he said, "what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." Abram paused. His voice was not angry, only honest. "You have given me no children," he continued, "so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the voice returned, and it brought not correction, but comfort. "This man will not be your heir," said the Lord, "but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Abram stood in the quiet, waiting. Then God gently led him outside. The night sky had opened. The stars had come out at last. They filled the heavens, more than Abram could count. They sparkled over the hills, over the trees, over the tents and herds, and the path he had walked since the land of yore. God said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Abram looked up, and the stars stretched far beyond the horizon, like a sea of lights. Then the Lord said, "So shall your offspring be." There was no noise, no great signs or thunder, just stars, and silence, and a promise that filled the night. And Abram believed the Lord. In that moment, with the cool earth beneath him and the stars above, he trusted completely. He did not understand how or when. He did not know the path ahead. But he believed. And the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. Then God spoke again, gently. "I am the Lord," he said, "who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." Abram, still full of wonder, asked softly, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" And the Lord, in his kindness, answered not with words alone, but with a sign, a ritual of covenant. He told Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram gathered them carefully. He did as God instructed. He cut the animals in two and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds he did not cut. He waited in the quiet, watching. As the sun began to set, Abram drove away the birds of prey that came down on the carcasses. He did so gently, keeping the space sacred. Then, as evening fell and the sky turned from gold to deep blue, a deep sleep came over Abram, and with it, a thick and dreadful darkness. In the dream, the Lord spoke again. He told Abram of what was to come. He said, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will return here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." And as the stars shone on above the camp, and Abram slept in the mystery of that vision, something holy passed between the halves of the offering. A smoking firepot and a blazing torch, symbols of the Lord's presence, moved silently between the pieces. No words were needed. It was a covenant, sealed in sacred silence. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates." The promise was not a dream. It was real. And it came in stillness, in mystery, in peace. When Abram awoke, the stars still looked down on him. The earth was quiet. The animals slept. Sarai stirred softly in the tent behind him. The air smelled of ash and earth and night. And Abram breathed deeply, knowing that something holy had taken place. His journey was not yet finished. The road ahead was still long. But the voice that called him was still with him. The stars above still watched over him. And the promise was still alive, burning like the torch that had passed through the offering, steady and bright. The sun rose slowly over the land of Canaan. The trees of Mamre stirred in the breeze, and the air was soft with the warmth of another quiet day. Abram sat near the entrance of his tent, watching his flocks move across the hills. The promise of God was still in his heart, bright and sure like the stars that had filled the sky that night. He did not know how or when, but he trusted that the Lord would do as he had said. Yet within the tent, Sarai's heart remained heavy. Many years had passed since they left their home in Ur. Many camps had been set up and taken down. Many roads had been walked. Abram had become stronger, wealthier, more respected in the land. But Sarai still had no child. Each morning, she would look to the horizon and wonder. Each evening, she would watch Abram speak with God and kneel in prayer, and she would wonder again. Why had she not conceived? Why had her body remained silent? The waiting had grown long, and though she believed in God, she also felt the quiet ache of time slipping away. Sarai was not bitter. She was thoughtful, and in her stillness, she made a decision. One afternoon, as the sunlight dappled the tent walls and the low sound of sheep filled the air, Sarai came to Abram. Her voice was calm and measured. She said, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Her servant was a young Egyptian woman named Hagar. She had come into their household during their time in Egypt. She was quiet, obedient, and strong. Sarai had trusted her with many tasks. Now she placed in her a deeper trust, one born not of hope, but of surrender. Abram listened. He did not argue. The silence between them was long. Then he nodded. And so, after living 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram took Hagar as a concubine. Hagar became pregnant. At first, it seemed the plan had worked. There was a sense of movement, of progress, of something finally taking root. But very quickly, the peace of the camp was troubled. When Hagar knew she was with child, her heart changed. She looked upon Sarai with less respect, as if the one who could bear the child was greater than the one who could not. Her glances were sharp. Her steps were proud. She no longer served with the same humility. And Sarai, though she had chosen this path, now felt sorrow rising in her. The plan had been hers, but the pain was real. She turned to Abram and said, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abram replied gently. He said, "Your servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best." Sarai, still wounded and weary, began to treat Hagar harshly. It was not cruelty. It was pain. But the result was the same. Hagar could no longer bear it. She fled. She left the tents, the flocks, the shade of Mamre. She walked into the wilderness. Alone, Pregnant and afraid, she wandered south, through dry paths and empty spaces. She stopped near a spring of water in the desert, along the road to Shur. There she sat, far from home, far from comfort. And there, in the heat and silence of the wilderness, the angel of the Lord found her. The voice was gentle, yet full of knowing. "Hagar," said the angel, "servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Hagar replied quietly, "I am running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel did not rebuke her, but spoke with calm purpose. "Go back to your mistress and submit to her," the angel said. Then came words that carried both weight and wonder. "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." The name Ishmael means God hears. The angel continued, "He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." But those words did not frighten Hagar. They were not a curse. They were truth, and within them, she felt seen. She felt known. She gave a name to the Lord who spoke to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." And she named the well Beer Lahai Roi, which means the well of the living one who sees me. It remained there, between Kadesh and Bed, a quiet place in the wilderness where one broken heart was heard and healed. Hagar returned. She came back to the camp, back to Sarai, back to the life she had fled. She was no longer only a servant. She was a mother, seen by God, carrying a child whose name meant that heaven hears. In time, she gave birth to a son. Abram named him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. And though the promise of a child through Sarai still remained unfulfilled, this child too had a place in the unfolding story. Not the heir of the covenant, but still loved, still seen, still held within the grace of God's great plan. That night, the stars once again filled the sky. Sarai lay quietly beside Abram. The sounds of a newborn could be heard in the nearby tent. And somewhere in the stillness, the promise remained, waiting, breathing, alive. The cool evening breeze stirred softly among the trees of Mamre. The sky above was deep blue, sprinkled with countless stars that shimmered quietly like distant lanterns. Abram sat alone outside his tent, resting beneath the vastness of the night. His heart was open, and his thoughts were calm. Suddenly, the quiet of the night was gently broken. A voice, soft but clear, spoke to Abram. It was the voice of the Lord. "I am God Almighty," the Lord said. "Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." Abram listened carefully. He felt peace wash over him. The Lord's words were steady and sure, like the stars overhead. "Your name will no longer be Abram," God continued. "Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you." Abram felt the weight of the moment, yet there was no fear in his heart. Instead, there was hope. God was speaking to him not only as a man but as a father to many. Then the Lord spoke to Abraham about his wife. "As for Sarai your wife, You are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham smiled softly. The years had passed slowly, but God's promises were alive and growing. Even though they were both old in years, the Lord's blessing was sure. God gave Abraham and Sarah a sign of the covenant. Every male in their household, including servants and those born in the home, was to be circumcised. This act was a symbol of the promise between God and Abraham's descendants, a quiet, lasting mark of their special relationship. That very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in his household and had them circumcised. It was a peaceful, solemn act done with reverence, under the quiet sky. Sarah, now with a new name and a renewed hope, held close to her heart the promise that a son would come to her, though she had long given up hope. The night passed softly over the camp. The firelight flickered gently, casting warm shadows against the tent walls. Abraham and Sarah rested with calm hearts, knowing that the journey ahead was still long but the promise of God was faithful and sure. And above, the stars continued to shine, just as they had the night God first called Abram to leave his home. The sun had set behind the hills near Mamre, and the evening air was cool and soft. Abraham sat quietly outside his tent, resting from the day's journey and watching the stars appear one by one in the deepening sky. The world around him was calm, the earth breathing slowly in the gentle night. Abram, now called Abraham, had learned much through his years of travel and trust. His heart was filled with faith and patience. His wife Sarah, once Sarai, was inside the tent, resting quietly. The promise of a son filled their thoughts like a gentle flame, small but alive. Suddenly, Abraham's calm was stirred by the sound of footsteps approaching. 3 men stood before him in the fading light. Their presence was peaceful but powerful. Abraham saw them clearly and rose to greet them. He bowed low to the ground, a sign of great respect and humility. "My lord," he said kindly, "if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, that you may wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." The visitors accepted his hospitality with quiet grace. Abraham hurried to prepare bread, selecting the finest flour and baking it with care. He chose tender calves from his herd and called for Sarah to prepare them. The smell of fresh bread and cooking meat filled the air, blending with the soft evening breeze. As they ate, Abraham stood nearby, watching the stars begin to twinkle brighter. The 3 visitors spoke gently among themselves. One of them said to Abraham, "Where is your wife Sarah?" "She is inside the tent," Abraham replied softly. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah, overhearing this from inside the tent, laughed quietly to herself. She was old, well past the age when women usually had children. She thought, "After I am worn out and my husband is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Her laughter was soft and unbelieving, but the Lord heard it. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child, now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid. She denied laughing, saying, "I did not laugh." But the Lord said, "No, you did laugh." Abraham's faith was gentle and strong. He understood that God's promises were not limited by human understanding or age. The promise was true, and the time would come. The visitors then rose and looked toward the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which lay in the distance, quiet in the night. The Lord spoke solemnly. "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. If not, I will know." Abraham's heart was moved. He stood before the Lord and pleaded with quiet courage. "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" he asked. "Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you destroy the place and not spare it for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it?" The Lord answered gently, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham continued with care and respect, asking if the Lord would spare the city if 45, then 40, then 30, 20, and finally 10 righteous people were found. And each time, the Lord said, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." When the visitors prepared to leave, Abraham walked with them a short distance, his heart heavy with both hope and sorrow. The promise of a son remained a bright light, but the fate of the cities was uncertain. As Abraham returned to his tent, Sarah came out to meet him. They looked up at the stars once more. The night was full of quiet wonder and deep mystery. Though the journey ahead held challenges, Abraham and Sarah trusted in the Lord's faithfulness. They knew that the promise of new life was sure, even when it seemed impossible. The stars above whispered their soft light over the land, carrying the hope of a future filled with blessings, peace, and rest. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills of Canaan. The light was soft and golden, touching the tents of Abraham's camp with warmth and peace. The air was still and calm, carrying the gentle sounds of life waking slowly, the bleating of sheep, the rustling of leaves, and the quiet murmur of servants preparing the day's tasks. Abraham's heart was full of a calm hope that had waited many years. The promise God had made long ago was now close to being fulfilled. Sarah, his wife, carried the child in her womb, a son born in the season God had appointed. The days passed quietly. Sarah's steps were slower but steady. The camp moved gently around her, with everyone careful to honor the new life growing within her. Abraham watched her with love and awe. He remembered the first time God had spoken to him under the stars, the promise of countless descendants, a great nation beginning with just one child. One day, Sarah's time came. With the help of trusted women in the camp, she gave birth to a son. The child was healthy and strong, his cries soft yet sure in the peaceful morning. Abraham held the newborn close, feeling a joy deeper than any he had known before. They named him Isaac, just as God had said. The name means he laughs, a gentle reminder of the laughter Sarah had once shared in quiet disbelief when the promise was first spoken. Now, that laughter was full of joy. As Isaac grew, Sarah cared for him with tender love. Abraham built an altar and called on the Lord's name, thanking him for this blessing so long awaited. The camp was filled with songs of praise and gratitude. But even in this peaceful time, challenges came quietly. Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Hagar, playing near Isaac. Though both boys were part of Abraham's family, Sarah felt a growing concern. She wanted to protect Isaac, the child of promise. One day, Sarah spoke gently but firmly to Abraham. She said, "Drive out this servant woman and her son, for the son of this servant shall not inherit with my son Isaac." Abraham's heart was heavy. He loved Ishmael, who was his firstborn son. But Sarah's words echoed with the weight of God's promise. Abraham prayed silently, seeking God's guidance. God spoke to Abraham in a quiet, steady voice. "Do not be distressed because of the boy and your servant woman," he said. "Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. But I will also make the son of the servant into a nation, because he is your offspring." With this reassurance, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away with kindness and provision. Though they left the camp, God's care followed them gently. And so, the promise of God was clear and faithful. Isaac, the son of laughter, was the beginning of a great nation. The years of waiting and faith were not in vain. That night, as the stars shone softly above, Abraham and Sarah rested with peaceful hearts. The land around them was quiet. The promise of God was alive and sure, like the steady light of the heavens. The journey of faith continued, slow and steady, with God's gentle hand guiding each step. The early morning air was crisp and calm as Abraham rose from his rest. The sky was a soft pale blue, touched gently by the first light of dawn. The earth beneath his feet was still cool and quiet. His heart was steady, filled with faith, yet also touched by a quiet heaviness he could not explain. God had spoken to him once more, with words both clear and challenging. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Abraham did not hesitate. He rose with quiet determination. Without question or delay, he prepared for the journey. He took 2 of his servants, his son Isaac, and the wood for the offering. They set out early, walking under the gentle morning light, the soft sounds of the camp fading behind them. The road was long, winding through hills and valleys, under open skies that stretched endlessly. Abraham's steps were slow but sure. Isaac walked beside him, carrying the wood for the offering, innocent and unaware of the test that awaited. For 3 days they traveled. The silence between father and son was filled with peacefulness. Abraham's mind was steady, focused on the word of the Lord. Isaac's voice broke the quiet on the 3rd day. "Father," he said, "we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham looked at his son with love and gentle calm. "God will provide the lamb, my son," he replied softly. They reached the mountain of which God had spoken. Abraham built an altar, placing the wood carefully. Then, with hands steady but heart full of sorrow, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar. Just as Abraham raised the knife, a voice called out to him from heaven, "Abraham! Abraham!" He stopped immediately. The voice was kind, filled with mercy. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the Lord said. "Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a nearby thicket by its horns. He took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. The moment was quiet but full of meaning. God had provided, just as Abraham had trusted. After the offering, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham again. "By myself I have sworn," said the Lord, "that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, I will surely bless you. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your offspring will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Abraham and Isaac returned together, their steps slow but steady, their hearts full of trust. The journey back was quiet and peaceful. The stars began to appear again in the evening sky, shining down like silent witnesses to a promise kept. That night, Abraham rested beneath the vast heavens, feeling the peace of God's presence surround him. The test had been great, but the faith had been greater. And so the story of Abraham and Sarah continued, slowly unfolding with moments of hope, trust, and gentle courage. The sun dipped low over the hills of Canaan, bathing the land in soft, golden light. The day had been quiet, and the camp around Abraham's tent moved slowly as evening came. Sarah's time had come. After many years filled with hope, faith, and gentle patience, she had peacefully passed away at the age of 127. Abraham's heart was heavy with sorrow, yet there was also a quiet strength within him. He loved Sarah deeply. She had been his companion through every journey, his trusted partner in faith and life. Though she had left this world, her memory lived on in the land they had walked together and in the promise God had made. The day after Sarah's passing, Abraham rose early. He went outside the tent, the soft morning light brushing his face. With a calm and steady heart, he spoke to the Hittites, the people who lived in the land around Hebron. "I am a foreigner and stranger among you," Abraham said kindly, "so sell me some property here to bury my wife." The Hittites looked on with respect. They saw the man who had journeyed far and trusted in the God of heaven. They spoke kindly, saying, "Listen to us, my lord Abraham. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs." But Abraham remained humble. "If you will give me the land," he said, "let me bury my wife there." He chose the cave of Machpelah, near Mamre, the field that belonged to Ephron the Hittite. Abraham approached Ephron with gentle words, asking to buy the field and the cave for a burial place. Ephron offered the field freely, but Abraham insisted on paying the full price. They agreed on 400 shekels of silver, a fair price for the land. With the deal made, Abraham buried Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. The place was peaceful, shaded by trees, and close to the land of promise God had given. Though Abraham mourned, he also trusted that Sarah rested in God's care. He continued to live with faith, knowing the promise of a future was still alive. The years passed slowly. Abraham cared for his household and his lands. The story of Sarah's life, her laughter, and her faith became part of the quiet history of the land. One day, Abraham thought of the future once more. He knew that Isaac, the son of promise, would need a wife. Not just any woman, but someone who shared the faith of his family and the hope of the Lord. With that in his heart, Abraham prepared to send a servant to his homeland to find a wife for Isaac. It was a task filled with care and prayer, a step toward the future God had promised. That night, under the same stars that had watched over him for so many years, Abraham rested. His heart was peaceful. Though the journey was long and often difficult, the faith that had guided him was steady and sure. And the promise of God, like the stars above, continued to shine, bright, eternal, and full of hope. The days had grown long in the land of Canaan, and the hills where Abraham lived were touched by the warm sun of late afternoon. The trees of Mamre cast wide shadows across the ground, and in the quiet of his tent, Abraham sat in thought. He was now very old. His beard was white, and his steps had slowed. But his mind remained sharp, and his heart still held the promises God had spoken to him years ago. His wife Sarah had passed away, resting in peace in the cave of Machpelah. His son Isaac, the child of promise, had grown into a quiet and faithful young man. And Abraham knew that it was time for Isaac to take a wife. But not just any woman would do. Abraham remembered the land of his birth. He remembered his family, his people, and the ways of their hearts. He did not want Isaac to marry one of the women from Canaan, whose customs were not in line with the ways of the Lord. So he called for his most trusted servant, the one who had been with him the longest, who managed all that he owned, who had seen the journey from beginning to now. When the servant arrived, Abraham spoke gently and clearly. "Put your hand under my thigh," Abraham said, according to the ancient way of making a solemn oath. "I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living. Go instead to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant bowed his head with respect, but he had a question. "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land?" he asked. "Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" Abraham shook his head gently. "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," he said with calm certainty. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you are released from this oath. But do not take my son back." The servant agreed. He swore the oath, placed his hand under Abraham's thigh, and prepared for the journey. He gathered 10 camels and loaded them with fine gifts, gold, silver, clothing, and food, for this was a journey of great importance. He set out for the town of Nar in Mesopotamia, the land of Abraham's relatives. The journey was long and calm, through quiet valleys and across sandy plains. Each night, the stars above watched over the servant and his caravan. He prayed softly as he traveled, asking for guidance, trusting that the Lord would lead him to the right woman. Finally, the servant arrived near the town. It was evening, the time when the women came out to draw water. He made the camels kneel beside the well outside the city, and there he prayed again. "Lord, God of my master Abraham," he whispered, "make me successful today, and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink,' and I will water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." Before he had finished speaking, a young woman came to the well. Her name was Rebekah, and she was very beautiful. She was the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Nahor, Abraham's own brother. She carried a jar on her shoulder and walked down to the spring to fill it. The servant watched her carefully, and then he stepped forward. "Please," he said kindly, "let me have a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," Rebekah replied with a smile. She quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After he had finished, she said gently, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." Without delay, she ran back to the well and drew more water, again and again, until all 10 camels had enough to drink. The servant watched her closely, silently praying, wondering if this was the answer. When she had finished, he took a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets and gave them to her. "Please tell me," he said, "whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor," she replied. "And yes, we have plenty of straw and food, and room for you to stay." The servant bowed low and worshipped the Lord, right there beside the well. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham," he said quietly, "who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." Rebekah ran to her home and told her family all that had happened. Her brother Laban hurried out to the well and welcomed the servant into their home. They brought water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Food was set before them, but the servant said, "I will not eat until I have told you what I have to say." They agreed, and he told them everything, about Abraham, Isaac, the journey, the prayer, and how Rebekah had answered it all exactly as he had hoped. Laban and Bethuel listened with care and said, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed." The servant bowed again and gave thanks. He brought out the gifts of gold, silver, and clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her mother and brother. That night, the household rested peacefully. The promise of a new chapter had begun. In the morning, the servant asked to leave with Rebekah. Though her family wanted her to stay for a few more days, they asked Rebekah, "Will you go with this man?" And she replied softly, "I will go." They blessed her with kind words, saying, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies." And so, Rebekah and her attendants mounted the camels and followed the servant. The long journey back to Canaan began under the same sky that had watched Abraham for so many years. In the fields near his home, Isaac went out one evening to walk and pray. As he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" The servant replied, "He is my master." Rebekah covered herself with a veil, and the servant told Isaac everything that had happened. Then Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death, and the promise of God continued, gently unfolding beneath the quiet skies. The sun shone softly over the land of Canaan, where Abraham had spent the last of his days. The tent stood quietly in the hills, surrounded by the familiar sounds of herds and wind through the trees. It was a peaceful land now, filled with memories and the soft presence of all that had passed before. After the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, the rhythm of life slowed gently for Abraham. His journey had been long and full. He had traveled far from the land of his ancestors. He had followed the voice of God through deserts and valleys, through joy and sorrow, through the laughter of birth and the silence of farewell. In the later years of his life, Abraham took another wife. Her name was Keturah. She bore him several sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. These sons grew and formed families of their own. Their descendants became nations and tribes that spread across the lands. But Abraham remembered the promise God had made to him, that it would be through Isaac, the child of laughter, that the covenant would continue. And so, as Abraham grew older, he made careful arrangements for his family. He gave gifts to the sons of Keturah while he was still alive, sending them away to the east, away from Isaac, to ensure peace and order within the household. Isaac remained with him in the land of promise, the quiet hills of Canaan, where Abraham had first pitched his tent and built altars beneath the open sky. Each morning, Abraham rose early to walk through the fields. He would look to the heavens and remember the stars that God had once shown him. So many stars, beyond counting. He would close his eyes and feel the quiet nearness of God's presence. The days passed gently. The servants in the camp spoke of Abraham with great respect. The flocks and herds moved calmly across the land. Isaac and Rebekah cared for Abraham, always listening to his stories, always remembering the great journey that had brought them here. Then one day, as the sun rose in a soft golden haze, Abraham lay down in his tent, his breathing slow and peaceful. There was no fear in his heart. His life had been full of faith, full of obedience, full of quiet courage. He closed his eyes and gave up his spirit. Abraham died at the good old age of 175 years, old and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His son Isaac, the son of the promise, and his son Ishmael, born of Hagar, came together once more. Side by side, they buried their father in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field Abraham had purchased long ago from Ephron the Hittite, the same resting place of Sarah, the wife Abraham had loved so deeply. It was a quiet, reverent moment. The earth was still. The trees swayed gently. The cave stood beneath the open sky, surrounded by peace. There, the man who had once left his homeland with nothing but a promise now rested beside the one who had journeyed with him through all the years. The blessing of God did not end with Abraham's death. The Lord continued to bless Isaac, who settled near the well called Beer-lahai-roi, the same well where Hagar had once seen the God who sees. The land was calm, and the future lay ahead, just as the Lord had promised. As Abraham's story came to a close, the story of the people of promise had only just begun. The stars above still shone with quiet brightness, symbols of the countless generations yet to come. And the God who had walked with Abraham through every step of his long and faithful life continued to guide his descendants, just as he had said. In the stillness of the night, beneath the quiet trees and the deep blue sky, Abraham's name remained, a name of faith, a name of promise, a name of peace. The hills of Canaan lay quiet beneath the rising moon. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering to one another in the soft night air. The tents had grown still. The fires burned low. And across the land, peace settled like a warm blanket across a tired heart. This was the land where a man once walked by faith. Abraham's journey had begun with a voice, not a loud voice, but one that spoke with authority and love. Go from your country and your father's household to the land I will show you. And without maps, without plans, with only the stars for a compass and a promise in his heart, Abraham went. Beside him walked Sarah, graceful, patient, and strong. She followed him through deserts and droughts, through strange cities and sacred moments, always by his side. Her laugh once came from disbelief, but in time it became a melody of joy. They were not perfect. They were human, slow to understand, quick to worry, sometimes uncertain, often waiting. But they walked forward anyway, step by step, breath by breath, year by year. They followed the God who called them not to comfort, but to trust. They waited for a child. And they waited. And then they waited more. They grew old under the sun and slept many nights under the stars. They packed and unpacked their tents. They moved with herds and servants. They watched the seasons pass. And still, they held the promise gently in their hands like a fragile lamp that somehow never went out. And then, one quiet morning, a child was born. They named him Isaac, which means he laughs. And truly, laughter filled their tent, sweet and deep, echoing across the hills. A promise delayed had not been denied. God had been faithful, just as he said. And that child became the bridge to something greater, the beginning of a people, a story that would stretch far beyond Canaan, beyond tents and altars, beyond time itself. Through heartbreak and hope, through silence and fire, Abraham and Sarah learned to listen. They learned to wait. They learned to believe that even the impossible is possible with God. Their lives were not grand in the way the world sees. They did not build towers or write books. They did not conquer cities or wear crowns. But they did something far more lasting. They trusted. They trusted when they had no reason to. They trusted when their bodies grew old. They trusted when the world was barren. They trusted when they did not know where they were going. And that trust became their legacy, a legacy written not in stone but in stars. Every promise made to them came from the one who never breaks a promise. Every step they took was guided by hands they could not see. And every fear they faced was met by the quiet voice of the one who sees, who hears, and who provides. Abraham is remembered as the father of faith, but he was also a husband, a shepherd, a father, a friend. He laughed. He cried. He doubted. He believed. Sarah is remembered as the mother of nations, but she was also a wife, a traveler, a listener, a dreamer. She waited. She questioned. She endured. She rejoiced. They were both chosen, not for their strength, but for their trust. Tonight, as you listen, perhaps your life feels full of waiting too. Perhaps your journey feels long. Perhaps your tent is pitched in a place you do not understand. And maybe, like Sarah, your laughter comes more from disbelief than from joy. But the story of Abraham and Sarah is not about certainty. It is about trust. Quiet trust. Gentle faith. The kind that grows slowly and glows softly, like the moon rising over the hills. So rest now. Let their story be a lullaby to your soul. Let it remind you that promises may take time, but they do not fade. That silence does not mean absence. That small beginnings are often the doorway to something eternal. And that you are not forgotten, not lost, not alone. The same God who called Abraham beneath the stars walks with you even now. He knows your name. He sees your heart. He hears your quiet prayers. He counts your steps. He remembers his promises. And his promises never fail. So breathe deeply. Let the journey of Abraham and Sarah drift over you like a gentle wind. Let the stars above be your reminder that even in the darkness, light shines. And may you rest, deeply and sweetly, knowing that faith is enough. Just as it was for them. And always will be.